Lesson 4, healthy at heart. Healthy at heart. In other words, emotional health. That's what tonight's class is about. We're going to be learning one fundamental idea. We're going to learn one fundamental idea tonight which really runs through the class. And I'm not sure how surprising the idea may be to you. It may not be, it may be. I'm not sure. I don't know. But I think it's a very illuminating and enlightening idea that helps many people in many situations. And so where are we? What page are we on, everyone? 92. We're on page 92. You're very good. We're on page 92. And there was an educator, a respected educator and thinker, who was already very well respected in 1960. And after having served in education for many years, he and his wife directed a center for troubled youth, providing shelter, rehabilitation, and skills for them. It's a serious production. And then he was reached out to become the director, the educational administrator for the network of Chabad schools that were growing throughout Israel, which he became. And he had at some point he came to New York and he had a meeting with the Rebbe. And he shared with the Rebbe his 10 fundamental principles of effective education. So the Rebbe read through them, and the Rebbe said, "You forgot the 11th principle." What's the 11th principle is that there are no universal or absolute principles in education. Yeah. So what was the point that the Rebbe was making? That of course the ideas that you write are excellent ideas and very applicable, but we always need to remember that every single person is very different. We're different emotionally, we're different intellectually, our psyche, our makeup is very different, and therefore you can't apply a single principle that's going to apply to everyone. Surely emotional health is the exact same way. There's no way to say that this is what you should do in every situation. You have to know the situation. I actually just dealt with a situation like this, where someone was emphatic without really knowing the individual that this is what you should do. Someone else sat with the individual and came to a very different conclusion. And the difference was only that the first person wasn't wrong. In other words, their concept was right, but was it right for this particular person? That's the question. And you have to know the particular person. So there are different approaches. There's an oldie and a goodie. You may have heard about a guy who he had a terrible fear. When he just, sometimes we call it in Yiddish a mishigas. You know what a mishigas is? Mishigana. You heard that? Right? Crazy. So we get a mishigas, a craziness in our head. And he went to sleep one night and he couldn't fall asleep because he just imagined that there might be a monster under his bed, and he couldn't fall asleep. And then the next night it became like a craziness. He couldn't sleep. So he went to his psychologist. His psychologist hears him out. He says, "Can you help me?" He says, "I can definitely help you. I've dealt with very similar things with other patients. And in order to help you, you're going to have to see me for about 6 to 9 months, twice a week. And we'll get this resolved." So he said, "Okay, let me think about it." He bumps in, the psychologist bumps into the guy a few weeks later. The guy's walking down the street, happy as ever, whistling. Life has never been better. So he says, "Wow, you look fantastic. Whatever happened? I never heard back from you." He says, "I got the whole problem's resolved." He says, "What'd you do?" He says, "I went to my rabbi." So I told my rabbi the problem. So my rabbi said, "I have a suggestion for you. Cut off the legs of your bed, and the monster won't have anywhere to be." You like that one, Mason? I know you're listening. What's the rabbi going to come up with? You see what good psychologists rabbis are? Point being that there are different approaches can work for different people. Yes. Is my calendar? Anytime. But what we want to do is we want to really discuss an underlying, something that underlies, tell me if there's another way to say that in English, by the way, underlays or underlies. Something that underlies much of the Rebbe's guidance to people who reached out to him with many different problems related to emotional health. So again, this is not absolute, and the Rebbe actually did approach different people differently, but this was quite a common approach that comes across very clearly. And what we're going to do is we're going to use some videos, of course, and some letters, some of the Rebbe's letters, where we're going to see how the Rebbe actually expressed this approach. So there are many different psychological models in dealing with issues. Just a moment. There's a more common model, and that's fixating on an issue in order to understand it. So this is very common, and I'm sure you can be very familiar with it when I say it. Whether you're familiar with it firsthand or secondhand, you probably heard about it. Someone has a problem, you want to know, why do you have that fear? So you investigate, let's say if we're talking about a fear, right? You investigate the fear that this person has. Where does that come from? And then we very often will go to childhood, like what happened in your childhood, when did this fear begin, right? And maybe we can get you back into that place and re-experience it, but this time you experience it with mature eyes and you're no longer in fear of it, whatever, I don't know, but it's dealing directly with the issue. There's an issue, we have to deal with the issue. Right? You got to deal with the issue if you want to solve the issue. This is a very common approach, and actually in Hebrew we have a saying, Yedias hamachla chatzi refuah, that the knowledge of the illness is half of the healing, right? Because if you don't know the illness, you can't heal. So just knowing what's wrong is already a tremendous thing, right? A lot of times we don't know what's wrong. That's a big problem. So just knowing what's wrong is there's actually a fascinating account of an Israeli Air Force pilot who was flying. I don't know if he flew in the Six-Day War or not. He doesn't mention it in this article where he mentions his story. But he was flying in 1970 during the War of Attrition and bombing. They would bomb Egypt. And that was when the Soviets were supplying anti-aircraft missiles to Egypt. And Egypt was starting to shoot down Israeli planes. And he was shot down. And he ejected. His co-pilot sadly was killed. He landed, was injured. He ended up being a captive for 3.5 years in Egypt. I can only imagine, or I can't even imagine what that was like. But he writes about it when he came back, even though he said, he put on a face of being someone who's reintegrated into society and actually back into the army. But inside, he was not the same person. He was not at peace. He was very disturbed. And someone suggested when he was going to New York that he should have a meeting with the Rebbe. And he was completely not interested, like a meeting with the rabbi, whatever. But he said to himself, he was being pushed. And he said, because the rabbi can really help you. And he said, what's going to hurt? So I'll meet him and I'll leave. What's the big deal, right? So he didn't object to it. And he went and he had a meeting with the Rebbe, and he was noticing, he writes his whole description. It's a fascinating article. He writes about how he saw all the people in front of him going into the Rebbe's room. He saw some people went for 2 minutes, some people for 3 minutes. He saw when people came out, he saw it was very serious. Everyone before they went in was preparing, they were very serious. And how when they came out, everyone had very different emotions on their faces when they came out. Some people were happy, some people were still serious, some people were crying. Everyone had different responses. See, he saw that something was happening in this short period of time, and he was imagining, like, what's going to happen? What can possibly happen in 3 minutes? He's going to go into the Rebbe's room in 3 minutes. He went into the Rebbe's room, and I think he was there for 45 minutes. Certain individuals the Rebbe spent a lot of time with. He basically started telling the Rebbe his story, and basically what the Rebbe did was the Rebbe asked him for every detail of his story. So he basically spoke out his entire story. And being that the Rebbe was who he was, so for this man, being able to share it with the Rebbe, who was an extraordinary listener, because he didn't only listen, but he truly immersed himself in the experience of the other person. I had a thought today. It's not a new thought, but just I was thinking about it today. I was pondering this today, that the only agenda a person should have is the other person. That's the only agenda we should ever have, the other person. Right? Wouldn't that be beautiful? When you master that, let me know. So, but the Rebbe mastered that. So he ended up saying his entire story and all of the suffering that he had and and he said, I shared with the Rebbe things that I was feeling then that I never shared with anyone. But for some reason, the context and the way the Rebbe listened, I just felt so comfortable to share all of these things. And he said when he was done, he was a changed person. So the Rebbe really did this. The Rebbe took him back to all of the, to everything he went through, heard it all out, and that was rehabilitating for the person. And this is not what we're going to be teaching tonight. But I'm saying that to say that there isn't one way, right? So we're not saying there's the right way and the wrong way. We're just saying that there is a unique way that a lot of people don't necessarily approach things with, which can be very powerful. And the Rebbe was a big advocate of this other way. And that is that there is a flow of life that lives, or a reservoir of life that lives within every single one of us. I'm going to say it this way. There's a wellspring of life that lives within every one of us. I like the metaphor of a wellspring because it's flowing out. It flows out. The thing is that there are obstacles that block it from flowing out. And suddenly it starts getting contained. But really it's a wellspring. It's trying to shoot out, right? But there are things that prevent it from shooting out. And when we are in rhythm with our inner health, our natural healthy self, that wellspring of life flows out. When we're out of rhythm with that, and there are different things that can take us out of touch with our own self, what can easily happen, and what happens very often, and I have no doubt happened with every single one of us. I don't mean in a clinical way, but just in a normal life way, we spiral out of control, and we start living in this reality that usually is living within our head, that we're living in, and it's detached from who we are. And it's fascinating because you may have experienced, I've experienced this, like people will tell me, you're so delusional. Like, what are you saying about yourself? It's nonsense, right? But we lock ourselves so deeply in this trending thought that we just don't even hear what people are saying around us. And therefore, there's an enormous benefit to simply take a person and remove them from focus on their problem. Stop thinking about, your issue. Not only stop thinking about your issue, but if necessary, and usually it's necessary, get yourself involved in something so you can't be thinking about your issue. Right? One of the big blessings of my job is that I simply don't have a lot of time to act out. I don't have, so like my circumstances just don't let me. It's terrible. That's what I speak to my therapist about. I don't have time, right? But sometimes you're in a situation or life, you want to know one of the blessings of 9 kids? You don't have time, right? And you know what? It's just a matter of a few minutes and another kid's coming there and need something. So whatever you're getting caught up in, you get woken up very quickly. But removing ourselves from focusing on the problem and focusing on productive activities, that re-engages us with the inner wellspring of life that flows within us and just starts flowing again. And the problem gets pushed to the side and we start living out of who we are. And that's all we want to do. That's all we need to do. So we don't need to solve the problem. Right? We don't need to solve the problem. And this was a very common theme that the Rebbe approached things with. So a novel approach is moving the mind away from bothersome thoughts and towards productive activities. And I will tell you that I have seen complete transformation in people when they've done this, or I would say usually when they've been guided to do this. When they've been guided to do this, it can be completely transformative. I'm going to tell you exactly where I've seen it. Generally speaking, when a couple goes to a marriage counselor, right? There are issues. They're coming because there are issues. So what's the conversation? The issues, right? What happens when you speak about issues? You get more heated up and passionate about them, right? And when I tell you about my spouse's issues, she becomes a bigger problem, right? And then the other spouse has to defend. And then the therapist says, well, I'm going to tell you why you feel that way because you had parents that were like such and such. And he has parents that were like such and such. And that's why you are that way. Which only reinforces, oh, that's why I'm that way. So of course I'm this way, so I'm going to always be this way. And then there's another approach. Now, I'm not saying that, therapists, that's the end all of every story, but having success in marriage therapy is not an easy thing, even for a good therapist. But there's another approach. The other approach is I'm not interested in your issues. Not interested. I don't want to hear a single issue. I want to know if you know how to love your spouse. And we're going to find out, because you're going to tell us how you think you should love your spouse. We're going to ask your spouse how they would like to be loved. And you do that, and then you go the other way. And then you tell both of them, I want you both to be the most loving spouse you've ever been in the last week, so that when you come in next week, we're going to assess who felt more loved. No issues anymore. All of a sudden, everyone's being the spouse that they're meant to be. And I'm telling you, literally magical things happen. Again, this requires two spouses who genuinely want their marriage to improve, but magical things happen. And then there just needs to be reinforcement in staying on that program. Magical things. And that's exactly actually what the Rebbe says. What the Rebbe teaches about how to deal with many problems. Now, of course, these are not clinical issues, right? These are not people who, are psychotic or whatever it may be, right? So they're normal people in society who have the normal struggle of being in a relationship, as we all do. So that's just one example of how this plays out. So what we're going to do is we're going to study 4 case studies. 2 of them are going to be through letters that the Rebbe wrote to people, and 2 of them are going to be videos that we're going to watch about how the Rebbe spoke with people about different issues. And the first one is, as you can see, bothersome thoughts and guilt. Now, right, I was going to say, anyone having trouble relating? Right? So bothersome thoughts and guilt, this is like all over the place, right? Who doesn't have bothersome thoughts and guilt? So that's what this first case study is about. Let's go to text 1a on page 92. Let's start there. Let's read text 1a.
With regard to the thought which you expressed in your letter, I believe I have already written to you before that there are many problems and states of mind which are best dealt with by dismissing them from the mind completely, at any rate for a period of time. It is then possible to return to those problems with a fresh mind and in a more objective state, so as to evaluate the problems in their true perspective and reality, and it is then easier to find the proper solution. In the vast majority of such cases, the individual himself can decide how long this period of dismissal from attention should be, judging by the degree of objectivity which he can attain as time goes on.
Excellent. So essentially what the Rebbe is telling, this is a young man, by the way, who is filled with these negative thoughts and guilty thoughts which is so rampant and so common. It's just part of being human. Any human being is going to think this way, practically, any human being. So what does the Rebbe say? Don't pay attention to the elephant in the room. Right? Basically, you have these negative thoughts, don't pay attention to them. That's what the Rebbe says. Right? So, in order to shut off undesirable thoughts, engage the mind in unrelated areas. Okay, so we're going to get to this. The question is, there's something called the ironic process theory. Anyone ever hear that? Ironic process theory. You never have, neither have I. But when I explain it to you, you'll know that you've heard of the concept. Maybe not the name. Ironic process theory is this, that there's an irony to the fact that when I tell you that when you put your head on your pillow tonight, please just don't think about one thing. You can do whatever you want, just don't think about pink elephants. Right? What happens when we put our head on our pillow tonight and we remind ourselves we were in the class, which I pray that you're going to forget you were ever here, right? You're going to start thinking about pink elephants, and then you're going to try and stop. And what's going to happen? You're not going to be able to get it out of your mind. And you think to that darn rabbi. Right? That's ironic process theory. That when you tell someone not to think about something, what happens? They can't stop thinking about it. So you hear the Rebbe is telling a person who's having guilty thoughts or negative thoughts, don't think about these thoughts. Don't have these negative thoughts. But the big question really is, how? How in the world is someone supposed to stop having those very thoughts? Right? And when you tell them, the more you tell a person to stop, the more the person is going to have those thoughts. So let's read text 1b, which is a continuation of the letter.
Needless to say, also, that it is not an easy thing to dismiss a problem from the mind, especially a matter that involves one's own self. This would be almost impossible unless one can engage one's thought and attention in a completely unrelated subject. For, man's thinking process is constantly in a state of flux and has a tendency, consciously or subconsciously, to revert to the subject matter which one wishes to dismiss from the mind. Therefore, when resolving to dismiss the matter from one's mind, it is necessary immediately to find some other subject, unrelated to the first, in which to engage one's attention. Another point which is also almost universally true is that it is not easy for the person involved to find the proper subject in which to engage one's mind. But here it is possible to receive help from friends who would know you and your psychological makeup. Undoubtedly, you have some friends within reach.
Excellent. So the Rebbe also guides him in saying that friends can help you in what would be good for you to focus on. By the way, I'm an expert at this. I'm an absolute expert. I'm a world-class expert at this. I could be walking to my office to do something, and then out of habit, I take my phone out of my pocket and look at the text that just came in, and I have completely forgotten what I was going to my office for. See, I'm an expert. Welcome to it. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. That is an unintended expression of actually what the Rebbe is saying. But really, there's another teaching that there's a saying in Yiddish, in apusta kleipman, which means in an empty one they collect. Thoughts can come into your head if your head is not busy with intentional thoughts. So when we immerse ourselves, for example, we immerse ourselves in a book, which would be an easy way of doing it, like a novel or something like that. That's an easy way because it's easy, it's light, and distracting. But if we do it even more so in a deeper study of something, right? Or we're learning something, whatever it may be, then we're immersing ourselves in something and we completely forget about what our mind was on. So it's not that we're saying make believe like you don't have bothersome thoughts. No, you have bothersome thoughts. That's fine. But now we're going to put other thoughts in your head. So just don't dwell on those thoughts. Just don't feed them. Right? There's everyone knows that story about the two wolves. There's some story from some ancient whatever. They talk. It's another way of saying it's another story of the good inclination and evil inclination, and the one you feed gets stronger. No one knows what I'm talking about. Someone even made a podcast called "The Two Wolves" or something. Yeah. But anyway, the point actually is that we get to choose what we're going to feed our mind, and that then becomes prominent in our life. And the other things become less prominent. And it's somewhat simple, and simple is not necessarily easy, but it's simple like the path. What to do is simple. How to do, You have to be strong, and to hold your headspace is not an easy thing to do, but it's something that definitely we can do. And then the Rebbe takes the person further in this letter, and he addresses his feelings of regret and guilt, which, by the way, in today's study of Tanya, I'm pretty sure it was today's study of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe writes that guilt, he speaks about how destructive guilt is. Guilt is completely destructive. The problem with the Jews is, the problem that Jews have is that when you tell them that guilt is a destructive emotion and they get rid of their guilt, they feel guilty that they got rid of their guilt. Like literally. Like they're feeling guilty that maybe there's something wrong with me because I'm not feeling bad enough about myself. So let's read text 1c.
Generally there is the teaching of our sages that nothing stands in the way of repentance for the past and commitment for the future. Here too the principle enunciated above may be applied, namely, that although it is necessary to end the transgression immediately, whether it is a sin of commission or omission, it is often necessary to end immediately any self-recrimination or brooding in regard to the sins of the past. One of the obvious reasons for this is that brooding over past failures is bound to be depressing and discouraging and would undermine one's confidence in the future, even one's confidence in the efficacy of teshuvah. Therefore, it is advisable to dismiss such thoughts for the time being and leave them for more propitious times. May God grant that you should have good news to report in regard to all the above.
Excellent. You know, there's a very big idea in the Hasidic life, and that is that you designate a time for personal introspection. Stop having personal introspection all day. It makes you miserable. Don't have personal introspection all day. You say, that's not for now. Talk to yourself, right? Because it's really your animal mind. So you talk to your animal mind, because that's not you. That's just your animal mind. Hope I'm not confusing you. Okay, but it's an amazing way of working with things. You begin to realize that there are things going on in you that are not you. They're just, we'll call it your body. Okay, that's the way I tell it to people sometimes. It's your body or it's your brain. Your brain thinks things, right? Your brain, right? Your brain. So there's you and then there's your brain. You got it? There's you and there's your brain. So your brain, your body's feeling anxious. Oh, there goes my body again. It gets all anxious about things. This body is just unbelievable, right? But that's the body. I am noticing my body feeling anxious. So now I'm outside, I'm separated, I'm separating myself from that feeling, right? I'm not having the feeling, my body's having the feeling. That's actually very, very helpful. That's very, very helpful. So my mind is having all of these crazy thoughts again. And there it goes again. Oh, no. Mind, listen, now's not a good time to have the thoughts because we're in the middle of taking care of something. So we're going to get back to you because we have a designated time. And at that designated time, we're going to give you all the time you want. And if you practice this, it may sound a little bit silly. It's not silly at all. It's very serious. And if you practice it, you actually begin to discipline yourself, your mind, with what it's allowed to think when. It's like, no, you can't think whatever you want. I'm sorry, I'm the boss, and I'm going to tell you what we think now. Right? So that's the way you look at it. And so that's essentially what the Rebbe is saying here. And here, Judaism believes, number one, in tshuva, second chances. So yeah, you messed up. Wow, you messed up. Like I tell people, I'm totally not impressed by your sin. I'm totally not impressed. And God's not impressed either. He's seen much better. Well, don't get so excited that you did this thing. Right? Okay, you're not the first person, you won't be the last. Right? And you'll pay attention to it, you introspect, and you'll work on not doing it again. One's actual behavior must change for the better. Then you have to make sure, in fact, that you're improving your behavior, right? That's where change really happens. So don't brood over it. Just make sure that in the future, you're going to work better at not doing this. And then lastly, don't brood over the past. That's completely destructive. Brooding is completely destructive. It's not productive. It's not productive. It's helping nobody. It's bringing you down, down, down. That's why people wrote the letters like these, because they were busy brooding, and that didn't permit them to be able to function properly through their day, which is why they wrote the letters. But the key point over here is that we're not saying to ignore the problem, right? We're not saying that at all. We're saying deal with the problem that you have by introducing other thoughts in your mind. Okay? We're not saying ignore it. We're saying deal with it by bringing other thoughts into your mind. And if there's a time that you want to designate for introspection, do that. That's fine. That's a confined space. We call it, a safe space where you do it, and all of that's good. Okay, how are we doing so far, everyone? Okay. So let's now go to another case study, which is a story about an adult woman, married with kids, who is suffering from anxiety. Okay? Now, I also know that all of us know what anxiety is. Now, surely we all deal with it on different levels, but we all know what anxiety is. We've all had it, and maybe have it, right? So we can all relate to this story, and hear how the Rebbe simply, and I want to use the word simply, because the Rebbe approached many of these issues simply. I think sometimes when we lose the simplicity of it, then we make it very complicated and very difficult to resolve. So how the Rebbe simply approached this issue, and you may know the person sharing the story here who's talking about his grandmother.
My grandmother, Taiba Lipsker, was a very, very special and holy woman. Like many of our grandmothers, she did not enjoy a serene and easy, smooth life. Growing up in Bolshevik, communist Russia as a Jew was difficult. Raising a family in Georgia during the 1930s under Stalin's tyranny was far from simple. Then came the war. They escaped the former Soviet Union on false papers, came to the displaced persons camps, the DP camps. Again, life was anything but serene, raising a large family, sometimes in one-bedroom flat. My grandparents made it in 1947 to the United States of America. They settled on a farm in New Jersey. That too didn't turn out so successful, and they relocated to Brooklyn, New York. My grandparents raised 9 beautiful, amazing children and a 10th orphan. Making a livelihood proved very complicated, and the upheavals of her life took their toll on her. She suffered from anxiety, from depression, from melancholy. And one day my grandmother consulted the Lubavitcher Rebbe what to do about her internal psychological and emotional state. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave her fascinating advice. He suggested to her that she go to as many Jewish weddings as possible and to dance away at these weddings and inspire other people to dance. As it happens to be, my grandmother was an exceptionally skilled dancer. She embraced the Rebbe's advice, and for decades, she would go to every possible wedding and dance away. Family, friends, relatives, community members, and sometimes complete strangers. Everybody knew Mrs. Lipsker is here. She is the life of the wedding and the life of the party. This was not part of her nature. This was quite contrary to her nature, but she did it, and she did it with every fiber of her being. She lived in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. There were many Bali Tshuva, young women and men who returned to Judaism, and they had small families attending the wedding, or sometimes no families. And my grandmother would come in, and she brought so much joy and vigor and stamina and inspiration to the wedding. She would dance away sometimes for hours with the bride and with the mothers and with the siblings and with the families and with the relatives. And indeed, the joy that she brought to hundreds and thousands of people over long decades, it came back to her. It gave her so much joy and strength and fortitude and resilience and inspiration. Besides the fact, exercising a few times a week for a few hours a night, dancing with all your might is also very effective for anxiety.
It sounds really simple, right? Go to weddings and dance. In a certain respect, it is very simple. Not easy, simple, but she listened and she did it, and that really took care of the problem. So that's again, if you're paying close attention, you're seeing it's really the same piece of advice. Same piece of advice. Focus on something else which is productive. There are many, many examples of the Rebbe telling this to different people. I know there's a story with a woman who was engaged. She came in with her groom for a blessing, and when the meeting was formally over, she asked the Rebbe, "Can I stay on to speak to the Rebbe about something?" Could you imagine? You're with your fiance, and there's, "Can you get out? I got something to speak to the Rebbe about." That's sort of essentially what she did. And she told the Rebbe, "I suffer from anger. I don't think he should marry me." Could you imagine that? The Rebbe told her to visit hospitals and visit sick people. And he said, "Don't worry, your anger will go away." All the same advice. It's all the same guidance. It's simple guidance that actually we can give to many people, beginning with ourselves, very often, will be quite helpful to the person. So, dancing away with anxiety, the Rebbe advised a woman struggling with anxiety to dance at as many weddings as possible. There's more depth to this than just going to weddings and dancing, but it's really the depth of actually what I said earlier, that your agenda becomes someone else. The best way to stop thinking about yourself is to be consumed with others. So that's other people becoming an agenda. By the way, that's not what's popularly taught on all of the blogs and very deep, insightful websites that are available today. The exact opposite is being told, is what everyone says. You know, you have to pamper yourself, indulge yourself, love yourself more, etc., etc. That is the problem. That is the problem. Not to say that we shouldn't ever give ourselves time and etc., but when that becomes our obsession, that actually is the problem. Okay, case study number 3. There was the Rebbe established, I think it was in the 1980s, through Rabbi Shalom Bar Lipsker in Bell Harbor, Florida. Some of you may know. There's a very big, stunning shul there called The Shul. If you ever go to Bell Harbor, Florida, you should stop by just to see it. And he started an organization called the Aleph Institute, which basically serves Jewish inmates. The Rebbe spoke about how there are Jews in prison, and they need to be cared for, and they need to be told that they can do tshuva, that they can rehabilitate themselves. Unfortunately, our prison system doesn't do a good job with rehabilitation. So, one gentleman came with Rabbi Lipsker to the Rebbe after he had come out of prison, and he shares with the Rebbe how he's feeling. And if you feel that the Rebbe is a little bit direct to him, you may feel that, may not. I don't know that you'll feel that way, but if you do, you have to understand that when a person understands their relationship with others, now people relate to them, they understand how they can speak to that person effectively. There are certain people who can really come down with a hard fist on someone very effectively. Most people can't. The Rebbe doesn't do that here. I'm just saying in general, using it as an example, right? But sometimes a harsh word wakes someone up. You have to know if you have that relationship with this person to be able to use that tool. I mean, of course, that tool has to be called for. And then if it's called for, are you the one who can use that tool, right? So I'm just saying in the context of the way the Rebbe speaks to this person, but actually, I mean, I think this is a very beautiful conversation the Rebbe has with him.
I was in prison, and this rabbi here, and also the feeling of you helped me get through it.
God Almighty will soon forget about all this past.
I did.
You know what Passover is?
Yes.
Yeah. If the Jews have forgotten about Mitzrayim, it is time for you to forget about your prison also. God Almighty bless you, even if it's difficult, but try your best. God Almighty bless you.
Thank you.
So a guy's got a serious background. Whatever his background is, we don't know, right? But it's a serious background. He was sitting in prison, and he feels like he's stuck in the past, right? And the Rebbe is telling him, don't focus on the past. We believe in tshuva, and focus on what you can be doing moving forward. And that is freedom. And without being in prison, if we're stuck in our own past, we're in prison. It's a different type of a prison. It may be a more miserable prison because you can't get out of it. Wherever you go, it's there, right? So that's what the Rebbe was essentially saying, the same idea. And then the last case study we have is a letter to a mother of 2 daughters. She was having issues with her younger daughter. The younger daughter just started showing signs of disinterest in a lot of things and like apathy, and she brought her to a therapist to get help. And she came to the Rebbe. She wrote to the Rebbe to ask the Rebbe advice on how to deal with this with its sister. And the Rebbe, after hearing the entire context of what was going on, the Rebbe basically diagnosed the problem. But what did the Rebbe do? The Rebbe simplified the whole problem. And the first thing the Rebbe said is, it's not a big problem. Very often we make, and this is like part of the point, the objective of the Rebbe's approach, we make something into a big problem that we're now going to fix and solve and figure out where to come from and what we're going to do with it and how we're going to work with it, and when does it show up, etc., etc. And the Rebbe did the exact opposite. He said, there's no real problem here. It's quite simple. And here's what you can do as a suggestion that will help get past the issue. Let's read text 2a.
The reasons for your younger daughter's condition are not at all complicated. The causes seem to lie in the fact that your daughter is subconsciously jealous of her older sister, and such a feeling manifests itself by a desire not to be interested in those activities where the person is unable to compete successfully. Therefore, your younger daughter shows little inclination to engage in the activities in which her sister is more successful than she. However, since such is the attitude of jealousy, creating a subconscious feeling of guilt, one is prone to compensate for it by an outward show of attachment. That is why she flies to the defense of her sister if anyone should say anything disparaging against her.
Beautiful. So the Rebbe says she's disinterested because she feels she can't compete with her older sister. So anything that's associated with her older sister, she doesn't want to engage in. However, she feels guilty that she feels this competition with her older sister. So that's why she's very defensive in protecting her older sister as a way of compensating for her feelings of, and of course all this the girl doesn't really understand. But these are all the things that are going on in her. And all of it is simple, right? It's simple, that's normal. I mean, how many, I'm sure a bunch of us were in the exact situation. Either we were the older or the younger, or the better one or the, right? This is such a common thing among siblings. And so what do? You find other areas where she can excel, which the older sister is not involved with, where she can express herself and develop her own self-esteem, and then she'll be thriving again. And all of the issues actually are going to be solved. It's not always some deep, dark, complicated circumstances going on. And again, what's the Rebbe's advice? Find a healthy outlet for her where she can express herself. It's the same guidance that the Rebbe is expressing in each situation. Here's actually the Rebbe's advice in text 2b. Let's read the Rebbe's actual advice to her, to the mother.
At the same time, this diagnosis suggests also the method of therapy, namely that every effort should be made to restore her confidence by offering her opportunities to engage in such activities where she can take a leading part and excel herself. Needless to say, this should be done in a gradual way, for in her present state of mind, she would be reluctant to undertake responsibilities all at once. But surely, both at school and in other cultural circles, there are opportunities for her to develop her artistic and other talents. It would be psychologically beneficial to her if the activities would be of a kind in which her sister does not participate. The choice of such activities is fairly wide, and they could be cultural, charitable, or youth work among Jewish youth and the like.
Great. So what is the Rebbe saying again? The exact same point. The Rebbe advised finding areas in which she could excel on her own. Again, find another area where she can express herself so that she's not living in these negative feelings. The advice basically runs throughout. We're good, everyone? Interesting? Okay. So the question is, if the Rebbe was advocating this approach, then clearly we know that this approach must be a Torah-based approach. That means there must be basis for this in the Torah. There's got to be. Everything the Rebbe did was completely Torah-based. So what is the Torah basis for the Rebbe's approach? And what is the logical basis? Right? What's the Torah basis and what is the logical basis for telling someone to ignore the elephant in the room instead of engaging with the issue? It does sound very counterintuitive. So we're going to look at two letters, and we're also going to engage with an interview of a renowned psychologist, and all of them together are going to shed light on the basis, the Torah basis, and the truth of this method. The first letter we're going to read is a letter that was written in 1986, which for the Rebbe's leadership, a lot of the letters we read were from the 1950s, 1960s, right? That was when the Rebbe's leadership had begun in 1951. The Rebbe passed away in 1994. So 1986 was at the later stages of the Rebbe's leadership when the Rebbe it was much harder to actually, people no longer had private meetings with the Rebbe. The Rebbe didn't have time for that. They only had, those meetings where the Rebbe would give $1 and there was a very brief encounter. Or people wrote letters to the Rebbe and sometimes they were answered. Well, here's a letter that the Rebbe wrote to a female mental health professional who sought the Rebbe's advice. Of course, when someone writes a letter to the Rebbe, we don't see that letter. We only see the Rebbe's response. So we surmise from the response what the person's questions were. Sometimes it's more clear, sometimes less clear. But we're going to see from this letter, he's writing to a woman who's a mental health professional and giving her advice. The exact question of hers, we're not quite sure what that was. Let's read text number 3.
It is difficult to offer counsel from afar, as the conditions of the country, the family, and so on have a direct bearing on the situation. Those who observe a situation from close proximity are better and more expertly equipped to arrive at an effective treatment. However, since you have already written to me and everything is by divine providence, I wish to emphasize something that I have witnessed in the majority of similar cases. A decisive and extremely effective method, which to my amazement is not used, at least not as much as it should be used, is hesach hada'at, guiding the patient to entirely remove their mind from actively dwelling on the problematic issue at hand. The more the patient succeeds in ceasing to think about and dwell upon those issues that are the cause of their problems, the greater will be the ability of their natural internal healing powers, along with their other positive and curative aspects, to function with increased intensity and bring about healing. The above can be accomplished through arranging that these individuals are preoccupied with activities that lead to personal fulfillment, such as doing someone else a favor, something that in any case is acceptable to all and that should not be difficult to convince them to do. This is particularly so nowadays when instability is so prevalent and individual needs are so numerous. It is relatively simple to find a way for these individuals to help others with activities that are consonant with the needs and nature of the local and of the individual who requires healing.
Thank you. It's really interesting because this was 1986, and the Rebbe writes in here, this is particularly so nowadays when instability is so prevalent and the individual needs are so numerous. If it was so prevalent in 1986, whoa, 2024, it's super duper prevalent. It's interesting. And what's the approach? The two key words here are hesach hadas, which basically means removing your mind from it. I once spoke to a woman who lives in Colorado about a particular issue, a human challenge, which she wrote a book on because she overcame this challenge. And essentially, her entire book is one thing, hesach hadas. That she dealt with this, she tried everything and anything that everyone says you should try in order to deal with this issue. And the only way she overcame this issue was by removing her mind as much as possible from the issue, not focusing on it, and therefore not dealing with it, and therefore the issue simply subsiding. Which was just astounding to me when she told that to me. In other words, what we're saying is don't let negative thoughts take center stage. You know, like one of the tricky things when you deal with a room of people, which I sometimes have to do. This is, by the way, one of the most the decorum of this room is like, you know, it's through the roof. But in most Jewish crowds, you know, so all different types of characters need to assert themselves. And really, the part of the challenge is, like, when someone says something, is your response going to feed them until they take center stage, which will basically destroy the room, right? Or will your non-comment let it dissipate? So yes, there was a comment, but it's not worth commenting back because otherwise you're going to lose everything. And that's sort of like, you know, what you're trying to figure out to do. So with negative thoughts, we want to make sure that the negative thoughts are not taking center stage. But in order to take this approach, and this is what we really need to appreciate, and develop within ourselves, in order to take this approach, well, you say, well, I mean, if we're not going to deal with the issue, then what's the person going to, you know, how's the person going to be rehabilitated? We must have a deep faith in humanity. That means a deep faith that there lives within every single person a wellspring of life. And that when all of the junk is removed, that wellspring shoots forth. Everyone wants to live a productive, meaningful, good life. Some people were just either, you know, through modeling, through issues that they're born with, whatever it is, they just don't know how to let that wellspring just come out. And we are helping them actually when we are helping them take their attention off of the issues and actually focus on like getting that wellspring to start flowing, like helping it come out in some way or another. And that's faith in the divine within every single person. And that we have to, when we have the faith, we know that that is far greater than the elephant in the room. The elephant looks enormous. The elephant is nothing like the divine energy that lives within the person and the divine potential that lives within the person. And this is the unbelievable faith that the Rebbe demonstrated in anyone that he encountered. There's a letter that the Rebbe sent. Here's a second letter the Rebbe sent to a young woman with very toxic introspection. Right? You ever have one of those nights or something, maybe something went wrong, right? Or you messed up with something, right? Which is completely shocking that you would actually mess up with something since you're perfect, right? So, and you begin to have these brooding thoughts about how terrible you are and you don't know what you're doing. I'm the worst mother, I'm the worst father, I don't know how to be a normal spouse, I can't make money. Like, you know, it goes on and on, like it starts growing, like, you know, if a tree grew that fast, right? So, this was basically the letter that this girl sent to the Rebbe. So, and here's the Rebbe's response in text number, what text do we have to? Text number 4? Yeah, text number 4.
I fail to see any grounds for dejection and for your statement that everything has suddenly fallen apart. Since your anxiety is unfounded, it will not last long. Started today and gone tomorrow, that is, provided you do not actively invite morose thoughts that run contrary to human nature and the dictates of our Torah of life, which requires for each of us to serve Hashem, specifically with joy. In truth, this service is possible and necessary at each moment of mortal life. You surely recognize, backed also with personal experience, the verily observable reality that if it is sometimes difficult to battle a certain mood, the best advice is to distract your attention from the mood, not by fighting it, but by focusing your thoughts elsewhere. The general model for this approach is, Hashem made humans straightforward, but they sought many complications. Since the complications come from they, therefore they have the ability to nullify them easily. I will conclude with my advice, since you sought my counsel. Completely divert your mind from all introspective, self-examining thoughts. Proceed with confidence along your life's path, since Hashem's providence accompanies each of us at each step of our lives, not only regarding matters that we consider highly important, but in every detail of our lives.
Beautiful. In reading this letter, I just realized how my example before was actually a more accurate example than I realized. When you have a person who makes a comment which is really with the attempt to take over the room, okay? Right? So if you feed the comment by commenting back, what happens? That person's position in the room begins to grow. When you fight against something, you strengthen your opponent because you recognize them as an entity. You've acknowledged them. If you don't acknowledge them, they have to just slip away. There's no acknowledgement. You're not giving them any substance. And that's really what the Rebbe is saying. You have negative thoughts, no problem. Just move on to other things. Move on to other things. If you engage with it, it becomes a focus, it becomes a much greater entity in your life. And that's why people walk around, I have this problem, I have that problem, another problem, like with a whole list of problems. And I'm dealing with them, I'm working on them, right? And sometimes the solution to a lot of those problems is just, you have this problem, no problem. Keep them in your back pocket, keep them on your resume, and just go and do something productive, right? And suddenly those problems no longer are front and center. There was a psychologist born in Romania who became very prominent in Israel. He was an Israeli clinical, developmental, and cognitive psychologist, and his name was Dr. Reuven Feuerstein. And he was the founder and director of the International Center for the Enhancement of Learning Potential in Jerusalem. Sounds impressive. And his theories actually were implemented in many, many places throughout the world. And the Rebbe used to send people directly to him. And he discusses this in this video, and he discusses what he learned from the Rebbe, and it's really fascinating.
Professor Reuven Feuerstein is a world-renowned Israeli clinical and developmental cognitive psychologist, founder and director of the International Center for the Enhancement of Learning Potential. His applied systems are being implemented in over 80 countries across the globe.
The rabbi referred to me children for their problems of development, some epileptic children, some Down syndrome children, and wherever I came, and wherever I visited or I worked in my field, people were addressing themselves to me. The rabbi wants you to see our child. And some of them received really letters from the rabbi, or the word from the rabbi, that I should see their child. And one of the things, and I must say, they believe that such a thing is possible, that people with genetic disorders, chromosomal disorders, can be turned into high functioning, normal functioning, and very close to study, to Yiddishkeit, etc. I heard it very much from the rabbi. It was a daring thing, because at this time, people didn't believe it's possible. So I was dealing with this, and I was asked by people, how do you dare to tell people that this child will ever be able to speak? How do you dare to say that this child will be able to read, will be able to finish school, will be able to go to yeshiva? That's not what we expect. And much of this belief, much of this power of belief came from my interaction with the rabbi, one particular case which I cannot disclose, and therefore it came from a country in Europe. This boy was considered to be mentally defective and placed in a kind of a special school for deficient children. And there he lived among non-Jewish people and had learned more of their behavior than from their, so he learned to become a real problem. In a variety of areas that I'm not going to describe, but to the extent that one didn't believe that he will ever be able to function and to be independent and to be. And this man, the father, in some way he was not a very religious person, came to the rabbi. The rabbi told them to bring his son to me. The son came here and was placed in a family. He learned to read. He was sitting here near this door on a chair with a Tehillim. The rabbi said to finish Tehillim each week. And he learned this. This was the third year that he was with us. And he learned this. And Baruch Hashem, this went very well. And we were already feeling that we have done what the rabbi told us to do and empowered us to do. And we felt Hatzlacha. Then things happened, and this young man went into the greatest danger. Not only drugs, but things which I cannot tell you. He ran away, and he came into a place from where very few people came out. And I then addressed myself to the rabbi. The rabbi said, don't leave him off your hand. Continue. And he gave me even a suggestion to send somebody to take him out from this place. I have never believed it would be possible. But the rabbi said, I've sent somebody. We took out this young man from this terrible, promiscuous drug people. With there's no Averav Sheba'olam he was not involved with. He came back. I want you to know, he is now the father of 4 children. Many of them, 2 of them, learning in yeshiva. And they are the only children of this family, only grandchildren of this family, which the grandparents can be proud of. As a psychologist, and one says a good psychologist, could never believe that with my own knowledge and my own psychology, I would have ever been able to do it. Usually, in such cases, we raise our hands, nothing to do. Not with the rabbi. I must tell you something. Psychology, as it is taught, is very limited. Our understanding of the other is very much affected and related to our understanding of ourselves. In the way the rabbi understood the condition of the individual, in the way he claimed and suggested and felt empowered to say, yes, do it, there was a very different way of seeing the human being. Not as a just reflection of yourself, but as something which comes be'ara dilela.
I hope you enjoyed that. Dr. Feuerstein, Reuven Feuerstein. I don't know if maybe he's living. I shouldn't say anything. I don't know. Yeah. Reuven Feuerstein. Yeah. So, based on all of this, hopefully we're going to be able to include everything I want to get through. We can now understand why the Rebbe had a relationship with a man by the name of Viktor Frankl, who you may have heard of. One of the great fathers of modern psychology. He lived 1905 to 1997, a Holocaust survivor, author of the best-selling Man's Search for Meaning. If you've never read Man's Search for Meaning, read it. Man's Search for Meaning. It's got to be on your bookshelf. It's an amazing, amazing book. And founder of logotherapy. Logo meaning meaning. Logo meaning meaning. Meaning therapy. That was his his approach. He lost his parents in Auschwitz. He lost his brother. He lost his pregnant wife. They were all murdered by the Nazis. And he was a student of Freud, but he shifted. And he no longer believed that a human being at their core pursues their desires. He didn't believe that human beings at their core pursue power. But what he introduced to modern psychology is the belief that humans have the ability to transcend their most horrific circumstances through their connecting to their meaning, which is very, very powerful. And if you just hear what I just said, you'll understand that's exactly what we were saying the entire evening. He was once asked what logotherapy is, and the text number 5 is how he responded to this particular person, which is really cute. Go ahead, yeah.
I am reminded of the American doctor who once turned up in my office in Vienna and asked me, "What school do you stand for?" I answered, "It is my own theory. It is called logotherapy." "Can you tell me in one sentence what is meant by logotherapy?" he asked. "At least, what is the difference between psychoanalysis and logotherapy?" "Yes," I said, "but in the first place, can you tell me in one sentence what you think the essence of psychoanalysis is?" This was his answer. "During psychoanalysis, the patient must lie down on the couch and tell you things which sometimes are very disagreeable to tell." Whereupon I immediately retorted with the following improvision. "Now, in logotherapy, the patient may remain sitting erect, but he must hear things which sometimes are very disagreeable to hear." Of course, this was meant facetiously, and not as a capsule version of logotherapy. However, there is something in it, inasmuch as logotherapy, in comparison with psychoanalysis, is a method less retrospective and less introspective. Logotherapy focuses rather on the future, that is to say, on the meanings to be fulfilled by the patient in his future. Logotherapy, indeed, is a meaning-centered psychotherapy. At the same time, logotherapy defocuses all the vicious circle formations and feedback mechanisms which play such a great role in the development of neuroses. Thus, the typical self-centeredness of the neurotic is broken up instead of being continually fostered and reinforced.
Beautiful. And what I love from this reading is that how he says that it's a method that's less retrospective, so you're going back less. It's less introspective, where you're going into your own thoughts, right? But what you're doing is you're going to outward towards fulfilling something meaningful. So I get consumed in something meaningful. So I don't drown myself in my own thoughts. I don't drown myself in past things which may have been unpleasant, and he sure had a past which was deeply unpleasant, but I move into what is meaningful to me and I consume myself in that, And that actually, like he says as well, and we've discussed this a few times, the typical self-centeredness of the neurotic is broken up. You're basically breaking this cycle of coming back to myself and my problems by going out of yourself and out of your problems. You're leaving it all behind. Yeah, okay, you can be there, but I'm going here. And you go out there, and suddenly you find yourself in this world of great meaning and great joy. Now, interestingly, the Chabad rabbi in Vienna, his name is Rabbi Yaakov Biederman, and his wife Edla, they moved there in 1981. And like many Chabad rabbis do, they send out a calendar, and in the calendar there's a very important envelope. If you never noticed it, I want you to know there's a very important envelope in the calendar. So for people to send a donation. And what shocked Rabbi Biederman, or surprised him, I don't know, shocked him and surprised him, was that he received, when he sent this out, Dr. Frankel must have been on there. He was living with a non-Jewish woman, as you'll hear in a minute. He wasn't very Jewishly engaged, and he sent a donation to Rabbi Biederman. Every year he would send a donation. Every single year he would send a donation, and that was a relationship between Rabbi Biederman and Dr. Frankel. He would send a donation every single year. But in 1995, he suddenly found out why Viktor Frankl was sending him a donation every single year. So let's watch this fascinating story.
Rabbi Yaakov Biederman is the director of Chabad Lubavitch in Austria. Shortly after he arrived in Vienna in 1981, he began to receive annual contributions from Dr. Viktor Frankl, the pioneering psychiatrist and founder of logotherapy.
התעלומה הזו, שפרופסור פרנקל מצא לנכון לתרום דווקא לחב"ד, לארגון דתי, לארגון שעוסק בהפצת היהדות, למרות שהוא עצמו בשום צורה לא הזדהה כאדם ששייך, נפטרה לנו הרבה שנים אחר כך, רק בשנת תשנ"ה. איש ביטחון מודיע לי שישנה אישה מבוגרת שמעוניינת לפגוש אותי, ואני אמרתי לו שיכניס אותה. והיא התחילה במילים האלו, היא אמרה לי, קוראים לי מרגרטה חייס. אם אתה חושב שאתם השלוחים הראשונים של הרבי לאוסטריה, יש לי בשבילך הפתעה. אני הייתי השליחה הראשונה של הרבי לאוסטריה. הייתי די המום, והיא ממשיכה לספר. היא קיבלה הזמנה לפגישה ביחידות עם הרבי. ובאותה הזדמנות אני סיפרתי לרבי שמפעם לפעם אני חוזרת לאוסטריה. ובסיום אותו מפגש, באותה יחידות, הרבי ביקש ממנה שבפעם הבאה שהיא נוסעת לאוסטריה, הוא היה רוצה שהיא תיצור קשר עם המזכירות של הרבי. הוא רוצה לבקש ממנה שתמלא משימה מסוימת. היא אומרת, רק כמה חודשים אחר כך התכוננתי לחזור לאוסטריה. אמרו לי בשמו של הרבי שכשאני מגיעה לווינאי, שאני אצור קשר עם פרופסור ויקטור פרנקל, ושאמסור לו בשם הרבי שלא יתייאש ושלא יבוש מפני המלהיגים, ושימשיך בדרכו וימשיך בהפצת משנתו, שיתחזק, והרבי מברך אותו שהשם יצליחו והוא יזכה לפריצת דרך. דוקטור ויקטור פרנקל היה פסיכיאטר עמית של זיגמונד פרויד לפני השואה בווינה. אחרי שהוא היה במחנות ריכוז וחווה מצבים יוצאי דופן, הגיע למסקנה הפוכה. הוא אמר, האדם ביסודו הוא מחפש תכלית ותוכן לחייו, ולכן הוא האמין שרפואת הנפש מאוד קשורה יותר עם הענקת תוכן ואמונה, ערכים לבן אדם. הוא עמד בראש מרפאה חשובה, והוא גם היה מרצה באוניברסיטה, והשתתפו רבים בהרצאותיו, אבל יחד עם זאת, הוא היה מושא ללעג ולקלס, כי האסכולה הפסיכואנליטית של פרויד שלטה בכיפה, והיו מפריעים לו אפילו באמצע הרצאות. הוא היה עד כדי כך פגוע שהוא ובאותם ימים, כשמרגרטה חייס חיפשה אותו במרפאה, אמרו לה שהוא כבר תקופה לא הופיע. היא הגיעה אליו הביתה. נקשה בדלת ללא כל הודעה, כי לא היה לה אפשרות להודיע לפני כן. והיא תיארה שכשהיא נכנסת לבית, כשהיא פותחת את הדלת, פותחת לה אישה, שלא נראית יהודייה. היא יכלה אפילו להבחין שהיה תלוי צלב בתוך הבית. היא הייתה בטוחה שזה מאוד מוזר שהרבי שולח אותה לעודד מישהו שגר בבית כזה. אבל בכל אופן היא עזרה אומץ והיא שאלה אם אפשר לראות בבקשה את דוקטור פרנקל, ואז הוא הופיע בפתח הבית, והוא שאל אותם מה הגברת רוצה, והיא ענתה לו שיש לה בשבילו מסר מרבי שניארסון, מברוקלין, ניו יורק. היא אומרת, בבת אחת פניו השתנו, הוא אמר לה, תיכנסי, יש לה מסר מרב, היא נכנסה, והוא ביקש ממנה לשבת בסלון, ואז היא אומרת לו, הרב שניארסון ביקש ממני למסור לך שלא תתייאש, שתתחזק, אל תבוש מפני אלו שמלהיגים, סופך להצליח ותזכה לפריצת דרך. בערך אלו, זה היה תוכן הדברים שהיא מסרה לו. היא אומרת, ההתרגשות שלו הייתה משהו שהיא מעולם לא חוותה אצל אדם מבוגר ועוד אצל אישיות כזו. הוא פשוט פרץ בבכי תמרורים. ואחר כך לקח לו זמן עד שהוא יכל לדבר, והוא הראה לניירות שהיו לו על השולחן. אלו היו ניירות תפסי הגירה לאוסטרליה. הוא היה כל כך מדוכא מהיחס אליו, שהוא החליט לעזוב את וינה. ועכשיו, כשהוא קיבל את המסר הזה ממנה, המסר שהרבי העביר אליו, הוא אמר לה, אני אתחזק. זאת אומרת, אני חוזר לעבודה ואני אמשיך. הוא התחיל בצורה מאוד בטוחה להטיף את משנתו. הספר שלו, האדם מחפש משמעות, Man's Search for Meaning, תורגם ליותר מ-12 שפות. הספר הופץ בלמעלה מ10 מיליון עותקים. אני רציתי לאשש את הסיפור הזה. אחרי שהיא סיפרה לי את זה, אני ביקשתי להתקבל לפגישה אצל פרופסור פרנקל. הוא כבר אז היה די מבוגר, למעלה מגיל 90. אני התקשרתי אליו ושאלתי אם אוכל להתקבל אליו לפגישה. הוא אישית ענה בטלפון בבית, הוא אמר לי שהוא חלש מדי והוא לא יכול להיפגש. הוא גם היה קצת קצר רוח, הוא לא היה במיטבו. אז בכל זאת, בטלפון שאלתי אותו, אם השם, הרבי מלובביץ', הרב שניארסון אומר לו משהו, רציתי פשוט לבדוק את הנתונים, גם איתו אישית. ברגע שהוא שמע את שמו של הרבי, אז נימת הכל השתנתה לגמרי. הוא פתאום נהיה מאוד סבלני. הוא אמר, ודאי ששמו של הרבי מלובביץ' אומר לי הרבה. אני חייב לו המון. Ich schulde ihm sehr viel, הוא אמר לי בגרמנית. הוא הוסיף ואמר, ich schätze den Rabbi sehr. hat mich in einen sehr kritischen Moment geholfen. ברגע מאוד קריטי הוא עזר לי. אני חייב לו רבות.
I find the story to be amazing also just to see we will never understand the scope of influence that the Rebbe had in the world, right? On people we will never know. These are stories that we know. So with the few minutes that we have left, there's a letter that the Rebbe wrote to a woman in 1969, also a mental health professional in Haifa, in Israel, let's go to text number 7. I know we're jumping. Let's go to text number 7. Who has the microphone? Go ahead. On page 105. Yeah.
I took particular interest in the writings of Dr. Frankl from Vienna in this matter. To my surprise, however, his approach has apparently not been appropriately disseminated, nor has it become popularly accepted. Also, one can find numerous reasons as to why his ideas are not widely accepted. The question as to why it's not appreciated still remains.
Beautiful. So we see that the Rebbe was a big advocate of the approach of Viktor Frankl. So we're going to conclude with a letter that the Rebbe sent to a young woman who had a very pessimistic outlook in life and also felt incompetent. Very common feelings. Pessimistic and incompetent, usually they go very well together. And here was, we're going to read the Rebbe's letter in segments. So let's start with text 8a on page 106.
Understandably, I do not agree at all with the foundations upon which you construct your perspective and conclusion. By this I mean that I believe they are not grounded in the reality. Your current state of mind is only temporary, and the more effort you put into the quicker it will change. For it to be absolutely clear that you have the power and also the talent to be of benefit not only to yourself, but to yourself, but others as well. It is only that, like all things in this world, it is necessary to reveal and develop this potential into reality, which almost always takes effort. However, this is a degree of effort that is eminently attainable when one considers that their relatively brief efforts will benefit themselves and others for many years to come. And it will improve their and the community's welfare spiritually, materially, or both. And these improvements will likely have the ripple effect and reach even further than one will easily appreciate that their efforts and exertions to achieve this end are well worthwhile.
Beautiful. So, it just occurred to me to share this with you. You see that this woman is very pessimistic, and she feels has very low feelings about herself, and the Rebbe completely rejects her conclusions about herself. Which, by the way, I try to remind myself also very often, whenever I'm in a low when my mind is in a low state, which I know when I'm having these pessimistic thoughts, I simply remind myself that I'm either tired or something happened, so I'm not in a good mood or whatever it is, and just get a good night's sleep, and tomorrow you're going to have a whole different perspective, which is exactly what happens. Like you wake up and all of a sudden the whole world looks different, right? So knowing that is very helpful. And the Rebbe then tells her that you have unique talents that can benefit you and can benefit others. So firstly, one's negative self-view is a false passing state. It's simply false. The way you're looking at things is simply not a reality. And that you can benefit yourself and others. That's uplifting. Each person's unique capabilities make them an important contributor to society. Now, I can only imagine that this girl getting a letter from the Rebbe saying this to her was very empowering. I've learned that everyone needs encouragement, and everyone needs acknowledgement that they're on the right path and they're doing the right thing, and it's good. There's a therapist that I'm in correspondence with on WhatsApp, so it's basically voice notes, and she's always checking in to see if what she's telling her patients are true or aligned with the Torah. She's a religious woman, and her patients are religious, etc. And at one point, I told her that the work that you're doing is outstanding work. You're a blessing to your patients, and it's such a gift. Everything you're doing is wonderful, and you should continue doing it. And her reception of that, right? I was able, from the voice notes, I was able to hear that she really needs the confirmation that what she's doing is proper. And she responded back that she was in tears hearing that. In other words, it was so elevating for her to hear from someone else the validation that what she's doing, and this is a person who is a professional, who so many people come to for help, and is a real professional. She's like a really skilled woman with a very unique approach to helping people in a very deep way. She's like really a talented woman. And we can facilitate that for other people, being the outside person, and hopefully people will facilitate that for us as well. But that can be a real game changer in someone's life. Then the Rebbe continues to remind her, though, that things don't happen instantaneously in this world, and people don't just change by a snap of a finger, and you have to realize it's going to take a little bit of time. Let's read text 8b.
Without a doubt, in a vast majority of instances, it is impossible to radically change one's frame of mind instantaneously. However, this is not what is required. It will suffice that upon receiving my letter, you will resolve to move in the right direction, to begin leading a productive life. Start by taking a first step in this direction, and then, step by step, in an accumulative progression, you will soon find yourself on a road to life that brings you self-contentment and satisfaction. If you wish to heed my advice, continue your studies next year, but in addition to studying, you should also involve yourself in providing education. It would be best to do so several times a week. My intent is that you organize groups of children and be their counselor, or even teach them subjects that can be understood on their level, holding Shabbat and festival get-togethers for them in similar initiatives.
So this is really a tremendous. So the Rebbe says, first of all, know that you have to make progress gradually. So just make sure you're moving in the right direction, number one. Number two, don't leave school because you feel like you're not being successful. Finish school and graduate. However, don't wait until you finish school to begin teaching others. That you can begin doing right now. So many people are always waiting, that when I get there, then I can begin. Actually, you can begin right now. You don't have to wait for anything. You can actually begin right now, and when we begin right now, we begin to realize the resource that we actually are for others. And then the Rebbe concludes with text 8c, which is another tremendous piece to this letter.
Consider well, there is so much to accomplish in our world, and each human carries so much potential. Due to the vast amount of work that needs to be done, we cannot afford to give up on even one capability or talent. It is therefore the mission of every single person to harness all the potentials and talents they possess to improve their part of the world. The beginning, like with everything, starts with learning the profession, acquiring the necessary knowledge in general, and especially the knowledge necessary for using the individual's unique talents. I hope that after you contemplate the above a couple of times, you will immediately begin being active, and you will not be fazed by the effort that is required. You will then be able to soon witness the fruits of your labor.
Beautiful. So in summary of tonight's class, the key to emotional peace: direct your energy and attention to finding meaning and purpose. Meaning and purpose is never found when you are turning within yourself. It's never found when you're indulging yourself. It's always found when you are putting something out. That's where we find meaning and purpose, and that actually is the key secret to emotional success. So I want to conclude with this question for you, and that is, where can you implement this approach in your life? Where can you implement this approach in your life? Where do you have negative thoughts that you can discard? Where can you engage in things which are more productive, that take you outside of yourself and in a mission that is of service, that is of meaning, that is of purpose? And you will find that in doing so, you will be much more emotionally happy and emotionally strong through taking this approach that the Rebbe teaches. All right, thank you very much, everyone.